Right now, with this World Health Organization accord coming at us like a freight train with these amendments to the international health regulations, we've got a lot of states working to stop that power grab. It is the rightful remedy, according to two of our most important founding fathers. And folks, if you live, especially in a Republican state, now is the time to work on those things rather than when the crisis hits.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for May 6th through May 13th, 2024, while supplies last. First, we feature 2023 1-ounce Silver Krugerrand at $3.10 over spot. We also have 1 10th-ounce gold Canadian maples at $29 over melt. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We are delighted to have this returning guest. Alex Newman is a contributor at the Epoch Times, also at The New American. He's the founder of Liberty Sentinel. He joins us this Friday, May 10th, 2024. Alex, thanks for coming back on Liberty and Finance.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me, Dunnigan.
With your visits here in the past, we've explored a number of topics that are near and dear to the hearts of our viewers and listeners, including those who want to stand up against government intrusion in their families' business, with separating the children from their families through government education that has really gone off the rails in many important ways. Also, you've talked to us about the encroachment of lab-grown meat and other sort of Franken foods that are destined to be foisted upon us and sometimes actually taking away people's freedoms to choose healthier and more God-given alternatives to our traditional food and nutrition sources. You've talked to us about the importance of pushing back against global overreach into our lives and basically the undermining of our representative republic by the United Nations, the WHO, the World Economic Forum, etc. And in that arena also the specter of central bank digital currencies and the tracing and tracking and loss of privacy and control and restrictions on our lives. So we've run a wide range of topics with you. You've written about these extensively. You've been interviewing experts on these even at a higher and higher frequency on your own YouTube channel, as well as writing about these topics. And we'd like to talk today about what individuals can and must do to basically reassert our God-given rights to privacy, freedom, sovereignty, and the right to stand up for what's good for ourselves, our children, our grandchildren, our communities, our states, in the face of all of this sinister intrusion that's going on, and it seems to be accelerating. So if we could start maybe at the very most local level, which would be the individual and the family, and that's where you've focused with us a lot in the past, and any really key and central points there that you want us to be aware of before we move out to the broader area, like how we can support our local sheriffs and why sheriffs are important and what they're doing, the actual actions. You just came back from a sheriff's conference where you were a speaker, and you talked to a number of sheriffs, and you've got some pretty fired up ideas about what they're doing to stand up for their people, and then broaden it out even further to what states are doing. For example, we just had a news story come out this last week or two of Louisiana passing a law to push back against their people of their state will not be subject to edicts coming down from the United Nations, the WHO, the WEF, etc. So let's start at the very ground roots level of the individual and the family, and bring us up to date on what you think are the most important things people need to be thinking about and taking action on within their own household for the good of their family.
Well, thank you, Dunnigan. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. Again, appreciate what you do. And I do think it is best to start with the individual and with the household. You know, we can't necessarily affect what's going on in our state capitals or in Congress or even necessarily in our county seat. But one thing that we do have control over is what we do in our own homes. You mentioned something really important. I cannot recommend highly enough to people to pull their children out of the government schools. Your children are being weaponized against you, against your family, against your country, against your freedom. They're being dumbed down in an incredible way. Less than 1/3 of them are even proficient in any core subject. That's according to the government's own data. So this is an absolutely critical issue. The last thing in the world you need during a crisis is to have to be battling your children as well. So this is a really, really important thing. As you know, I just finished a book on this, released a couple months ago, Indoctrinating Our Children to Death, How Government Schools War on Faith, Family, and Freedom, and how to stop it. A lot of resources in there for parents who want to take the plunge and make the right decision. But, for a whole range of reasons, I think that's critical. And just looking out at the macro level, the geopolitical situation right now, we've got these tension points that very quickly could morph into world wars. What's going on in the Middle East, the Ukraine, Russia, Taiwan, China, all of these things could become potential conflagrations that would suck the United States in an even more direct way than we've already been sucked in. And, they've been warning us that we may lose power, we may lose communication. So without sounding like a doom monger or a fear monger, I think it would be very wise to take some prudent measures, precautionary measures to protect yourself, protect your family, make sure you don't end up waiting in a food line, a FEMA food line or something of that sort, if and when things get out of control. And plus, we see the violence, the riots going on around our country. We saw that really in a major way in 2020. I suspect we could be headed towards something like that again. We've got hostile foreign agents all over our country right now. So just take some prudent steps to protect yourselves, your families. Remember, water is critical. Food, of course, is critical. Self-defense is critical. If you do not have those three areas covered, that's a very, very good place to start.
Beyond the individual level, and that level of preparedness, I guess, is particularly poignant for you and me at this point, both living in Florida as the hurricane season approaches. It's just common sense. And frankly, whether or not you live in a severe weather area of the country or the world, we are in a severe threat time of all of these forces that are impinging on our families. So preparedness and becoming less, as you point out, less dependent, less likely to be someone who's in a state of desperation, needing government handouts or government assistance, which most likely is not going to be there when you need it. And secondly, always comes with strings attached. But rather than having some of those things that you need to rely on for your family's well-being, having those close at hand as tangible physical assets and the relationships and with your neighbors and the skills that you need and the knowledge that you need to know how to use those at the time of need. So broadening it out then, you just came back from a conference of sheriffs in Las Vegas. If you could update us on what you learned there, the relationships that you made there with the sheriffs and what they are doing. It sounds like there's some exciting actions that brave and stand-up sheriffs are doing across the country to make sure that they're taking care of their people and not bowing down to these forces that are coming after the family.
Yeah, and it was a lot of fun. Learned a lot at the sheriff's conference, and it goes right along with the last thing you said there about community. Right, one of the most important things you can do for your home, for your family, is have a community around you of people that you can trust. And churches, homeschool co-ops, Bible study groups. There's a lot of different ways to get to, especially if you're new to a community, to get plugged in with a local network of people who you can trust, who will be there in a crisis, who may have a variety of different skills. Get to your farmers market, meet your local farmers. Just critically important stuff. And then extend that outward one more step. We do have lawfully constituted authorities at every level. We've got many of us city governments, and we've got our county government, and the sheriff, of course, is an incredibly powerful official across our country. So this conference that I went to in Las Vegas was convened by Sheriff Richard Mack and the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. They've got hundreds of sheriffs who are members. And Sheriff Richard Mack, for those who don't know him, great American. Back during the Clinton administration, the federal government decided that they were going to impose draconian new gun controls on the American people, and they tried to conscript the sheriffs into helping with this. Sheriff Richard Mack refused to participate. He refused to accept that this would be imposed in his county. And so it ended up in a major lawsuit, and it went all the way up to the United States. And in 1997, the Supreme Court ruled in this case, Prince versus United States, that the federal government, they just upheld what our founders already understood, what the people who designed our system understood. The sheriff does not work for the federal government. The sheriff works for his community. The sheriff is elected at the county level. His oath is to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of his state, not to Joe Biden, not to Bill Clinton, not to Donald Trump, not to any other national figure. It's to his local community. And so a lot of great sheriffs were there, a lot of great speakers as well. General Michael Flynn was there, a lot of great Americans. But a few of the sheriffs that really stuck out in my mind that just would love to share some of their ideas quickly. One of them was Sheriff Bob Songer, sheriff of Klickitat County in Washington. You can find these interviews. They're on our Rumble channel. YouTube, of course, deleted our channel. But Sheriff Bob Songer talked about how he had already deputized 150 members of his posse. And this is something, of course, that any sheriff can do. And this is something that throughout our history, sheriffs have done. We all remember the old Western movies where a big criminal gang would come into town and the sheriff's department would be overwhelmed. And so the sheriff would deputize fellow citizens who would then help enforce the law, who would then help take down the criminal gang that had come to terrorize and maraud. So this is something that sheriffs still have in their toolbox. Obviously, Sheriff Bob Songer gave some advice. Do background checks on these folks. You don't want to just deputize anybody. You want to make sure they're not criminals, or they're not dangerous, etc. But find men in your community who you can trust, who are able-bodied, in case you need them, right? And he uses them now for all sorts of things, search and rescue operations, things like this. But there may come a time when our sheriff's departments are absolutely overwhelmed by massive civil unrest, by breakdown in law and order. We saw some of that in 2020, and it's a very wise idea. Another sheriff that I interviewed there, Sheriff Glenn Hamilton of Sierra County, Nevada, New Mexico. Extraordinary individual. So he actually came to the conference with a pastor, Pastor Caleb Cooper, and they took the stage together. I interviewed them both later separately, and they had such a powerful story. Your viewers probably know New Mexico is currently ruled by a very tyrannical-minded governor who just thinks she can rule with her pen and phone and gun control and shut down. So anyways, the governor ordered during COVID that churches were non-essential and needed to shut down, and ordered law enforcement to get involved in that shutdown operation. Well, Pastor Caleb Cooper decided he was not going to be shutting down his church. So the state police were summoning him, and the sheriff came to the meeting, and the state police said to him, look, what if somebody came to your church and died from COVID? That would be really serious. And he said, yeah, that would be really serious indeed. But what if they died from COVID without hearing the gospel of Jesus Christ and ended up burning in hell forever as a result of that? I'm not shutting down my church. So the sheriff was very moved by all this. And as a remedy, without having to start a direct confrontation over this issue, he just walked in to the church one morning and deputized every man, woman, and child in that congregation because law enforcement was exempt from the order. So he made them all deputy sheriffs. They all raised their hand and took an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States and of New Mexico. And so the whole congregation were deputy sheriffs, and then they were allowed to meet peacefully at church. And I just loved what they had to say. He said he would have deputized every man, woman, and child in that county before running around and shutting down people's churches. So these are some of the creative ways that sheriffs can and must protect their citizens during tough times. We had Sheriff Dar Leaf out of Berry County, Michigan, who was talking about his investigations into the election irregularities he uncovered. So just a lot of really, really great ideas there. And that was basically the theme of the conference, right? The sheriffs have an obligation to uphold their oath of office. Their oath of office is to the Constitution. They are not just law enforcement officers. They're peace officers, and their highest obligation is to protect the Constitution, which is the supreme law of the land. It's above any regulations, any edicts, any decrees, any statutes by Congress or the states. And so if they come in and say, we want to confiscate your firearms, or we want to quarantine you for such and such disease, or we need to impose this mandate from the World Health Organization or from Joe Biden or whatever the case may be, it then becomes the sheriff's obligation to say, look, that's not happening in our county. We have a duty to uphold the Constitution. That's not constitutional. And so you're not going to be doing that to the citizens of my county. And more and more sheriffs are coming to the realization that not only can they do this, they must do it if we're going to preserve freedom in this country.
I think this is another example where we're seeing the wisdom of our founding fathers in the document that is the most amazing one probably in the history of the modern world, and that is the Constitution of the United States of America, together with its Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence. Because in that, the only law enforcement officers and branch mentioned is the sheriffs, and that their duty is to uphold the Constitution, because that tie to the Constitution seems to be basically a lifeline to sanity and to the stability of our future, because it seems that everything else that either goes through any of the individual other branches of the federal government is subject to the whims of any kind of corruption or influence from outside. And now we've got even this bigger specter at a higher level. One could claim a higher level than that, which is this global overreach from these unelected, sometimes completely anonymous. People don't know who is making these decisions, but we've all lived through restrictions that were imposed on us in the last 4 years, where our local authorities that put up the signs on the door say in compliance with or in accordance with or following guidelines of, and they just reference, these bodies that pass down edicts from on high. And right now it's very much present in the news because there's this global pandemic treaty that's being requested to be signed by countries that they will comply with instructions about that in the future. And it's quite chilling to people who say, we have a country, we live in our beloved country, and so do all the other people in the world live in their beloved countries, and we want them to. And we want to have our beloved country. We want to be free, to be within our own country and to be free and not be told from outside that we're just subjects, serfs, as we were back before when we were the colonies of Britain here. We had to follow the rules of a distant power rather than be able to be in charge of ourselves. So we have states that are standing up, at least in the face of this. Louisiana Senate recently passed a bill. The proposed law declares, this is Louisiana Senate Bill SB 133, quote, "The World Health Organization, United Nations, and the World Economic Forum shall have no jurisdiction or power within the state of Louisiana." Can you address that phenomenon of this tidal wave that's starting of pushback from local and state authorities against global overreach?
Yeah, and this is actually something that historically in the United States has always been understood as the proper, or at least one of the proper remedies for reining in abuses by either the federal government or some other source of illegitimate authority. If you go back to the earliest days, let's go back even before the founding of the United States. If you go back to the 1640s, you had King Charles behaving as a tyrant, tried to dissolve Parliament and rule as an absolute dictator, and pointing to the Magna Carta, which, again, involved lesser magistrates, the nobles, standing up and saying to the king, you don't have these powers. God's law says you can't murder, you can't steal, you can't do those things, so you can't do those things either, Mr. King. So 1640s, King Charles started behaving like a dictator. Under the leadership of Oliver Cromwell, the parliamentary army was raised. They refused to submit to these illegitimate decrees. They actually charged him with treason. Civil War broke out. And in the end, King Charles lost his head. So a lot of our founding fathers still had that fresh in their minds. That had been, about a century before Americans decided to declare their independence for similar reasons, incidentally. And for those who aren't familiar with Oliver Cromwell, one of the most important people in the history of Anglo-Saxon civilization, really. If you look outside the British Parliament, there's two statues of people. One is Oliver Cromwell. He's standing there with a sword in one hand and a Bible in the other. That's what he gave all his men before they went to war with the king for his illegitimate decrees. So you fast forward to the founding of our country, which was really the same thing. Lesser magistrates saying, we can't accept this kind of totalitarian behavior. We're going to appeal to heaven, and we're not going to submit to that. And fast forward just a little more. We get the Constitution. The United States government is created, and almost right away, you have Congress acting outside the bounds of the Constitution. They passed the Alien and Sedition Act. So it's just a tendency of people to want to ignore limits on their power and usurp more power than they have. And so these Alien and Sedition Acts were dealt with by some of our key founding fathers through a process known as nullification or interposition. So Thomas Jefferson, who's almost universally recognized as the primary author of our Declaration of Independence, and then James Madison, almost universally recognized as the father of the U.S. Constitution, they created the Virginia and the Kentucky resolutions. These were state-level responses to this usurpation of power by Congress. And what they said was, essentially, these are unconstitutional abuses. These powers were never delegated to the federal government. Therefore, it is the rightful remedy, is the phrase they use. It's the rightful remedy for state governments to interpose between the out-of-control federal government and the citizens of their states. And so that's exactly what they did. They refused to allow these things. And this has been a tool that has been used repeatedly throughout our history to address injustice. It was actually used to address the slavery issue. The Congress, under the influence of Slavery interests passed the Fugitive Slave Act, purporting to require that northern states participate in the kidnapping of runaway Africans, runaway slaves who had left their plantations, and then return them back to their supposed owners, to their supposed masters. Well, the northern states, more and more of them started saying, look, we're not going to participate in that. We're going to nullify that. That's an illegitimate, unconstitutional law. You cannot conscript us into your slave system. We don't do slavery in our territory. And so if anybody reaches here, they're going to be safe. We're going to nullify those things. And this is continuing to this day. And if you think about it, it doesn't have to be quite that dramatic. I mean, the liberals have been doing this for a long time on the marijuana issue. The federal government, until very recently, it may still have that classification, has considered marijuana to be against the law. They have classified it as a criminal offense to manufacture, possess, or consume this plant. And of course, they did that in accordance with UN treaties. A number of UN treaties purport to require that this plant be criminalized. And, this isn't a debate on the wisdom of criminalizing the plant, but how many states, well over half now, by the way, have legalized in some way or form the consumption, manufacture, production, and distribution of marijuana in flagrant defiance of the federal government? And the reality is, as Attorney General Eric Holder put it during the Obama administration, there's nothing we can do. We can't force them to help us enforce our marijuana laws. So fast forward to the COVID era. Over and over again, as the Biden administration and the Congress and the federal government tried to impose new mandates, states stood up and resisted. You and I are both sitting in Florida. Florida was really the premier example of this. When Biden, through OSHA, did the vaccine mandate, our state legislature had an emergency session. They passed a law making the fine 10 times higher for any company that fired one of their workers for not taking the mandated injection. So what happened? Not a whole lot of companies in Florida fired their workers for not taking that injection. Over and over again, our governor, Ron DeSantis, and forget the bickering between DeSantis and Trump right now. This isn't a commentary on the 2024 election. Over and over again, DeSantis said, I'm going to stand in between Joe Biden and the people of my state. When they tried to impose mask mandates on the country, Ron DeSantis said, no, we're not going to do that in Florida. In fact, we're going to ban mask mandates at the school level. And Joe Biden said, well, then get out of the way if you don't want to help. He said, I'm not getting out of the way. I'm actually going to stand in your way while you're trying to do this to our people. So right now, with this World Health Organization accord coming at us like a freight train with these amendments to the international health regulations, we've got a lot of states working to stop that power grab. I've dealt with a lot of the legislators who are working on this, and they're just passing very simple bills. Things like, we will not use any state resources, agents, agencies, vehicles, or anything to participate in the enforcement of any order, recommendation, regulation, or rule coming out of the World Health Organization or even the CDC. So these are very simple measures that states can take. Sometimes states are choosing to add teeth to these kinds of measures. Several states have passed legislation on firearms stating that if the federal government comes in and tries to enforce unconstitutional firearms, that they are to be treated as criminals and they will be arrested and they will be prosecuted. So a lot of different tools in the toolbox of states. Alabama, a decade ago, passed a law unanimously, by the way. Every Democrat and every Republican voted for this law to ban UN Agenda 21 within that state, in any state or subdivision of the state. So lots of tools available. It is the rightful remedy, according to two of our most important founding fathers. And folks, if you live, especially in a Republican state, now is the time to work on those things rather than when the crisis hits.
Yeah, let me just add fuel to that fire that the Senate bill in Louisiana that I just mentioned, which is refusing cooperation with the World Health Organization, United Nations, and World Economic Forum, saying they have no jurisdiction or power within the state of Louisiana, passed by a vote of 37-0. So in the Louisiana Senate. So Alex, for people who want to stay informed of the things that they should be encouraging their sheriffs and their governors and their local city council to stand up against for the rights of their family, etc., how can they get connected and stay in touch with you and your work, because you write and interview on these topics every single week?
Well, thank you, Dunnigan. So easiest way is my website, libertysentinel.org. People can sign up for the free newsletter, comes out twice a week. Also through the New American, where I serve as senior editor, is thenewamerican.com. We send out free daily headlines every day right into your inbox. And of course, we have a print magazine that the big tech companies can't mess with. So those are two very, very easy ways to do that. And on the sheriff issue in particular, I would encourage folks to reach out to the CSPOA. They do trainings across the country. In a lot of states, the sheriffs and their deputies can actually get law enforcement credits, professional development credits for going through those training courses. Really, really good stuff. Hundreds of sheriffs across the country have taken those. And then at the state level, the state legislative level, a lot of organizations working on this front as well. And I encourage people to reach out to them. There are folks that have written model legislation on all these things. One of the big articles I'm working on right now is about the effort by states to create bullion depositories in their state, right? Texas has already created one. I've spoken with the legislators who are now working on making that transactional so that even if the whole U.S. dollar financial system comes crashing down, the folks in Texas who have gold at the gold bullion depository will be able to transact that way. So there are all kinds of initiatives going on like this. I write about them frequently and happy to put people in touch with whoever they need to talk to if they want their state or local government to work on these issues.
We've been speaking with Alex Newman from the Liberty Sentinel and the New American and Epoch Times. Alex, thanks for joining us on Liberty and Finance. And folks, if you don't want to miss a single episode with Alex or any of our guests, make sure you get on our free mailing list at libertyandfinance.com. Just go to libertyandfinance.com, put in your email address, click submit, make sure you confirm on the confirming email. You have to opt in. Once you're in, you're in. You get one email in your inbox per day with all our latest interviews, including every interview with Alex. Alex Newman, thank you for joining us on Liberty and Finance.
Thank you, Dunnigan. Appreciate it.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for May 6th through May 13th, 2024, while supplies last. First, we feature 2023 1-ounce Silver Krugerrand at $3.10 over spot. We also have 1 10th-ounce gold Canadian maples at $29 over melt. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.